what I want to talk about is sort of how a lot of the things that I have learned, I realized actually were all completely wrong. So around 10 years ago when I first moved to Silicon Valley, I used to go to events like this. They were different name, different organizers, but similar kind of things. I had moved here, didn't know anything about all this startup VC entrepreneurship stuff. And I learned a lot. I learned the lingo, and I learned a lot of the stuff that allowed me to pretend that I knew stuff. And within 2 years, I had raised my first round of VC funding, even though I had no business experience, no business degree, and so on. But later I realized that a lot of the things that I had thought I had learned during that period were all completely wrong and came back to sort of bite me. And I realized a lot of things that I thought were right were wrong. And I've made a lot of sort of stupid mistakes because of that. So I'll start off with one of the first. Around almost 10 years ago, I got laid off from Netscape, and I was looking at new jobs. And Steve Jurvetson sent my resume to a startup, and I went and I had an interview. They had this really, really shitty office on the border of like Palo Alto, or no, it was on San Antonio Road near Mountain View and Los Altos. And they weren't terribly impressive, and they had a crappy office and ugly bathrooms. It was really dirty, and I just was like, ugh, this is awful. And I refused to go back for a second interview. And there was another company that was in Fortune's cool company list and red herring, top IPO of the next year and all this kind of stuff, and tons of funding and a fancy office, and I took the job. And the company that I joined, their technology turned out not to work. They went through tons of more rounds and down rounds and reverse splits, and they ended up actually going public and acquired by IBM, but none of the early employees ended up making anything because all the problems that that company had, and it was sort of the typical story that you hear a lot. The other company, the company that I thought was so unimpressive I wouldn't even go back to the second interview, later went public because they were worth billions, and I used to drive past their office and see this huge office, and they actually did quite well for a time. And I realized I had sort of judged things in the opposite way I should have. And there's this story about two barbers. There's the story about like a town that has only two barbers, and one has a really messy, crappy, it's really dirty, the store, and he has a bad haircut. And the other guy has a very clean barbershop, and he has good hair. And of course, the whole trick of the story is that you're supposed to go to the guy with the bad haircut and the messy barbershop because he's the one who actually is the good barber, and it's the opposite of what you would have thought. And I realized that that's sort of the way we often make these decisions. I should have looked at things other than whether the company had all these cool things in the magazines and all this kind of stuff, and it really didn't matter whether they had a great office. All these things were the wrong things. And I realized I later made similar mistakes about other things. And I've also realized there's sort of these myths now that everybody thinks is true. So one of them is the idea of smart money versus dumb money, that you need to work with a certain VC firm that's really, fancy because they bring this and they bring that. And recently I talked with a friend of mine who just raised a second round of funding, and he followed my advice and took a deal that was a better deal for him, but from a less famous firm. But he was still concerned, he confided with me, that he was not going to be able to recruit really great people because of this, because he didn't have the Sequoia or the Kleiner name. And I realized this is another one of the things we think, and yet the reality is sort of the complete opposite. When you don't have that name, you have to hire people who really believe in what you're doing, who really like you, who really are interested in the domain or things like that and have a personal connection. And when you have that fancy name, you can get these really fancy resumes, these impressive folks, and in fact that's what you're pressured to do. And those people really are mercenaries, not missionaries. Those are the kind of people who are actually probably very successful in the past. They're now less passionate, less hungry, they're more likely to be focused on the short term, they're more likely to be looking at this, just what is this going to do for me in terms of their career, in terms of sucking up to those investors. And the reality, I realize, is that the situation could be the complete opposite of what you think. And the same is true about a lot of things, about control, about the king versus rich situation, about first mover advantage, about whether you should take smart money or dumb. So basically what I've realized is a lot of these things in terms of the decisions you make that everybody needs to make about hiring, about raising money, is we're actually trained to look at the wrong things and it really can come to bite us. So I urge you all to rethink what you think is really important. Thanks.